The story of how America was stolen, Episode 15. The Great Strike of 1622 shattered the illusion of control. For the settlers, fear replaced confidence overnight. For the Powhatan Confederacy, the strike was a declaration. We are still here. But what followed was not negotiation. It was not reflection. It was not peace. What followed was a decision made in colonial councils, written into policy, and carried out with cold precision. The settlers decided that coexistence was no longer an option. Episode 15 is where the English response shifts from expansion to extermination. Colonial leaders gathered in panic. Letters were sent to England demanding soldiers, weapons, and authority to act without restraint. Governors argued that the native nations could never be trusted again, ignoring the decades of betrayal that led to the uprising. Their conclusion was brutal and simple. The only way to secure the colony is to remove the native presence entirely. This was not a war against warriors. It was a war against villages, families, crops, and survival itself. The English declared open season. Militias were ordered to destroy native food supplies wherever they could be found. Cornfields were burned before harvest. Fishing sites were poisoned or guarded. Hunting grounds were seized and patrolled. Entire villages were attacked at dawn, when families were most vulnerable. The goal was no longer victory in battle. The goal was starvation, once again. But this time it was relentless. Settlers didn't wait for resistance. They struck preemptively. They attacked tribes that had not participated in the 1622 strike. They punished entire nations for the actions of a few. Children were killed, elders were hunted, homes were erased, and the colonists justified it all by calling it security. They passed laws banning native people from entering colonial towns. Any native person found near English settlements could be killed on sight. Trade was outlawed. Communication was forbidden. The settlers wanted isolation, because isolation made destruction easier. At the same time, they rebranded the narrative. In England, the story was told as defending civilization. In the colonies, settlers were told they were fighting savagery. In reality, they were enforcing land theft through terror. This is where genocide stops being accidental and becomes intentional. The Powhatan Confederacy fought back where it could. Guerrilla attacks continued. Settler patrols were ambushed. Isolated farms were raided. But the scale had shifted. The English had reinforcements. The English had firearms in growing numbers. The English had unlimited ships bringing supplies and men. The native nations had land, and memory, and courage. But fewer numbers with every passing season. Disease spread faster now. Displaced families were more vulnerable. Starving communities weakened resistance. Some tribes were forced to flee deeper inland, abandoning ancestral lands they had lived on for generations. The land was being cleared, not just of forests, but of people. Opechancanough watched as the cost of resistance grew unbearable. He knew the English response had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The settlers had chosen a future where native survival was unacceptable. And yet, he did not surrender. Even as villages fell, the idea he sparked lived on: unity against conquest. Because even in defeat, resistance leaves echoes. By the late 1620s, the English colony of Virginia had transformed. It was no longer fragile. It was hardened by violence. It had learned that land could be taken faster with fear than with treaties. And the blueprint was set. What happened to the Powhatan would not stay in Virginia. It would spread. It would repeat. It would become the model for colonization across an entire continent. Episode 15 is not the end of resistance, but it is the beginning of a pattern. A pattern that would shape the next 300 years. In Episode 16, the story moves forward, as colonization expands, and the war against native nations becomes permanent policy.